Good evening. I am your host, Keziah, and tonight you join me by the fireplace on what is indeed a very dark and stormy night, for a tale that will chill you to the bone, funnily enough, about a creature which has none, a being of pure malevolence that will freeze your veins and leave you petrified. Shall we begin? Long ago, in a time where superstition and the supernatural were not merely passed off as things left to the realm of the impossible, an arguably more sophisticated folk inhabited a place in the frozen tundra of the subarctic known as Shetland, or in the modern tongue, Shetland. Their blood was filled with that of their kin, who were ocean-going warriors from the far lands of Scandinavia. They fought across the high seas for their gods. Far and wide they would travel and spill blood in the name of Odin himself to earn their seat at the table of Valhalla. A hardy folk would be an understatement. During the day, when the sun shines down upon the island and all its majestic beauty is illuminated for all to see, there is a proud beating of sturdy Hjartland hearts that fire in rhythm with the pounding of the sea lapping their shores. Stoic and hardy folk whose ancestors have known strife upon the waters of the north. You would be forgiven for questioning how on earth any creature of folklore tale could shake the heart of such a people. However, perhaps that makes our tale, my friends, all the more harrowing. May we move on? We begin in a home of hardened stone, nestled on the outskirts of Hjartland. There lived a fisherman, his wife and boy. Not so long after the Norseman and his family had migrated from their homeland, he'd hung up his sword and helm to peacefully provide farming and taming the wild ocean that sat only a stone's throw away from his house. At daybreak, he and his boy would descend upon the sands with nets and harpoons, drawing meat and food which both they could live off and barter with in the local village. There, a land of coin and plenty, soon a vast profit was made by the Norseman and his son. Their eagerness to and unrelenting nature in reaping the sea of her produce did not go unnoticed, however, and after the fourth day of rampant fishing, the Norseman noticed how the people in the village turned as he walked through the square, his wooden cart overflowing with fish. Soon, no one would buy from him. It was as if he carried upon his back a darkness that would bring doom to them all. He assumed that the paupers had run out of gold and decided to move town in search of more. As he exhausted his welcome in every village in a surrounding area reachable by horse, the Norseman had made quite a name for himself. In his eyes, a famed merchant, but the locals had another name for him, only to be whispered behind his back amongst the town gossips over ale. Gulv. This was after Gulveig, the Viking goddess of greed. The Norseman had earned his reputation as a blinded man, so engulfed in his lust for power that soon the village folk began to shy away from him, for they knew what his desire would bring upon them. His relentless theft from the ocean in their heads brought only evil to their door. Of course, our Norseman only saw their fear as confirmation of his might, and having had his reputation spread across the land, he decided his wealth had warranted an early retirement. And with that, the Norseman slithered back to his home, and in those four walls he would begin to indulge and consume. Days rolled by, and soon the Norseman was far too fat to fish, too fat to harpoon and net, and so he sent his boy to do his dirty work, whilst his wife made him meal after meal for him to gorge on. Pies and wine and all manner of extravagant things were placed before him to indulge in. Soon he grew so large and so unable that he was completely immobile in his chair or in his bed. The Norseman had become completely possessed by greed and gluttony. Soon the boy began to come back with less and less fish, exclaiming to his father that they were overfishing their shore and perhaps rest was needed. He was quaking in his boots lest he put himself before the lust of his father's heart and come between gluttony and its desires. The boy looked down at his feet. Struck by his father, he was sent to keep going. That night, as the boy returned with his haul, in on the sea mist, he saw a black figure, cloaked in rags, approaching his homestead. Confused, the boy put down his haul and watched as the figure approached him. The figure spoke and claimed to have lived through many years on the island, and told the boy of what fate awaited his father and that he should be issued a warning. Should he not stop fishing, the figure exclaimed that the town were plagued and that all who take too much from the sea are visited by night by a mass of flesh driven onto the land with the tide, malevolent and hungry. Should you steal from their water, they will enact your doom. The boy, petrified, exclaimed he was but a slave to his father, and asked if he would be free should the creature end his father's greed and take his life from him. The cloaked figure turned back to him and said, "The sea will take from him what it believes is owed. At night the veil of mortal perception is harmed, the light descends, and those who dwell in darkness move forward in pain to our end." The figure turned and left, disappearing back into the gloom. The boy returned to the house, and upon entering, had the option of calling out to his father to warn him of the fate which might befall him. But the idea of freedom transfixed his mind, and so he went to bed without saying a word, awaiting his father's doom. Soon the family slumbered. Fires went down and rooms grew cold. Thunder struck and rain did fall. The tide rolled in, and on it rode a mass of flesh, tortured by lust. It scraped and squelched its way up the rocks and moved a shadow darker than the night itself. Lightning cascaded. The boy awoke and saw the creature of which the figure had spoke. Boneless, the only word that came to mind, so hideous mortal language could not describe the terror installed, froze his mind at the sight of the creature that moved on the tide. Inevitably it came, closer and closer. The Norseman, still blind, continued to slumber, dreaming of gold, his wife by his side, as the sight of the creature filled the boy's eyes with darkness and pain and fear in his mind. Slam went the window, shattered glass was heard. Ghoul, still a slumber, was not disturbed. Oozing with greed, the evil churned and twisted and morphed around the boy whose father had earned his fate that lay within the Boneless. As the boy was taken, the last thing he saw were the twisted faces of those who had fished before, left lifeless. Swiftly the creature slithered back to the depths, with repayment honored. Upon the morn, the father awoke, only to find his boy's room was filled with nothing but sea air, shattered glass, and a broken bed. Soon he too perished of his wounds that he had inflicted from indulgence, leaving behind a widow and nothing more. The mother was left to grow old, isolated from the world, without explanation for what it is that had happened to her boy. She was driven mad. No sightings of her were made since, and thus there were no reports of her death. However, some say that if you are to walk the lands of Shetland in the sea mist, you can still hear rolling in off the tide the tortured wailing of a mother whose child was taken from her. Alas, my friends, 'tis but a tale. No recent record of the Boneless exists. Folklore exists merely in folklore. Anyway, as the story goes, the debt was repaid, so all should be well. Although, we can only hope no debts have been made to the sea since. But I'm doubtful you be the one repaying them. Will you?